Welcome to episode 9 of the Kindness Objective podcast. Joining me today is Nichole Harrop, and Nichole is a career coach who is taking a different approach to make a more inclusive, compassionate work environment by training leaders in ways that most people aren't really focused on, which is on the empathy side of the work.
Yeah, Melissa, it was so great to connect with you on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you so much. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and your role and everything that we're talking about, the focus on the empathy and bringing up great leaders.
Yeah, so a little bit about my backstory. I kind of joke about being born and raised in call centers because that's so much of my history and my past. And a lot of people don't love the idea of ever having to work in a call center, but I totally loved it. Really, my journey started when I was working and saw, I knew I wanted something more. I didn't actually go to college, and I was someone who liked the on the job learning and growing and kind of being able to see that light at the end of the tunnel at the job that I was currently at. So I knew that was a little bit of a challenge for me because I was coming in maybe without some of that additional education side of things. And when I joined a company here in Salt Lake City area in Utah, I saw an opportunity for growth, a company that I at the time was really excited about and wanted some future growth. And from early on in that training room, I thought I am going to grow into a leadership role here. So kind of had that intention throughout my time preparing for that leadership role. There was a lot of ups and downs. I got turned down more times than I could count. In fact, in one of the interviews when I was applying for team leader roles and I was applying for trainer roles to help with the training team. And in one of my interviews with the training team, I was struggling with my confidence and I changed part of my answer, and that interviewing manager scratched out so aggressively what he had written down in his notes because I was kind of changing my answer. Yeah, so if that didn't drag down my confidence already. And then at the end he said, "How are you going to react if you don't get the job again?" And again, talk about taking the wind out of your sails. So I got turned down so many times, and I didn't have an internal mentor really. I was kind of just throwing the spaghetti at the wall and hoping something would stick for a lot of different things and asking for feedback, feeling like some of the feedback I was getting wasn't quite clear. And that was really frustrating. I kept persevering. And I say all this, it actually happened within about a 2-year span. I went from starting at the company to promoting into that first level of leadership, which was a team leader role. It was, I think at the time, the fastest someone had ever promoted into that role because they value tenure. So I definitely think that that is something that shows that perseverance and keep getting up after you've been knocked down. And then from there, just growing in my career and seeing how much there is a lack of that soft skill development, that kind of empathy piece. So many other soft skills that I teach now are things that I really had to learn the hard way in my career. And a big thing in the workplace that I see as a common issue is that we promote high performing team members, individual contributors into people leadership roles. And that transition is not always the right fit because it's such a different skill set to really own your own schedule, be able to be self-managing, to then go into a role where you're expected to lead and guide and mentor other people. There's just not a whole lot of cross-pollination for those roles, but it's often those are the people that we're rewarding with these new job titles. And then they end up becoming these quote unquote bad bosses because they weren't prepared effectively for that growth. So that whole reason is why I developed the Future Leaders program through my company, Grovio.
That's a great backstory. And as far the call center, I worked in a call center in the past myself, and I honestly loved it too. If you're a people person and you enjoy people and you truly want to help people and you have autonomy within a call center environment, to be able to do that, it can be very, very rewarding. And I honestly love it too. Interestingly enough, when you talk about being shot down over and over again, it makes me think of Sony Music. I think it was Sony back in the day. This executive had been there for like 20 or 30 years and he was laid off. And as he was going through his desk, like at the bottom of the desk from like 30 years ago, he found a demo and it was Bob Dylan. And there was a note that he put on it that said, "Nothing happening here." And it was funny because Bob Dylan, like of all people. So to your point, perseverance and just keep going and strive for what you want is so true. You have to have a thick skin. You know, it's hard to get rejected like that all the time and come back again and try again for the same role. So kudos to you for that. And you're right.
Oh, thank you.
There are a lot of times where somebody's a high performing rep, but to put them in a leadership role without any sort of transitional support or guidance or direction, it can turn out to be a nightmare. So I would love to learn more about when you're working with people who are transitioning into their first leadership role. How do you teach be empathetic at work? How do you teach get to know your people and help support them to be successful? What are the lessons there?
So some of the content that I cover is talking about learning your leadership style. So most people say, I don't want to be a micromanager. Of course, we all know what we necessarily maybe don't want, but we talk about what are your personal values? What's your personal, purpose statement, different than a mission statement, for example. And so I kind of bring that to yourself so that as you're growing in your career and making different changes, you can know what's going to be in best alignment with you versus trying to fit a mold. Other things are self-awareness and building relationships, leading without the title, and the importance of feedback. So not only receiving, but when you're in a people leadership role, there's a lot of giving feedback. So you need to be comfortable with that. Internal networking and gaining buy-in, vulnerability and finding mentorship, and saying yes to the right things, and managing conflict. So first and foremost, though, I strongly emphasize that when you're moving into a leadership role, whenever that is, or whether they're currently there, I have them think about that level of psychological safety that they're creating among their team. And part of that really is getting to know people, connecting with them as a human and not simply a team member, a direct report, a number on some data sheet. Get to know your people as their full selves. What do they care about inside and outside of the workplace as you build that foundation? Because all of these other things don't quite work out well if you're not in that phase of creating that safe space and building that foundation for a relationship.
I literally had a podcast that I recorded prior to us coming on, and we were talking about the same sort of thing where don't lead by title, which was another thing that we covered on that. And so that resonates again, because you're validating the things that I believe in. And another thing that they said, the same thing, was you really have to get to know your people outside of work and inside of work. And that doesn't mean that you have to have a therapy session with your team and, like learn every single thing about their life and their past, but get to know them. Are they parents? Do they have elderly parents? Do their kids play sports? Just to where you can have a conversation that isn't just work driven, because that's how you really connect with people. And when you genuinely connect with people, that establishes trust. And then, of course, that trust leads to that psychological safety in the workplace. So you're absolutely right. I'm grateful that there is a company out there, that your company is out there, that is training these up and coming leaders, because we really do need to see a shift in the way things are a lot of the time in the office. There's a lot of toxicity in the workplace. I mean, I've seen some really rough things in the workplace, and it boggles your mind that that's allowed to happen at work and nothing is done about it. But again, as you have people coming into leadership roles and other people are retiring out of them, then if with the right training, we can eventually see that curve and turn the corner there. So what would you say is your biggest obstacle for new leaders that want to go into an environment that might not be so great and actually have impactful change?
So I would first say, even before you're in a people leadership role, because oftentimes people move into that because who isn't a little bit money driven to say, hey, I would love an increase if it's 10K, 20K, whatever that is. Yeah. We're going to be happy about that. But the responsibilities that come along with that. Are you able to do that? Are you willing to learn? What is that looking like? And oftentimes I challenge as well, what are you doing today to showcase, to do that leading without the title right now? How are you helping your team members? How are you, challenging some things, not in a bad way, but how are you challenging some decisions that are being made or asking deeper questions about the why? And if we're not understanding that piece of things, those are kind of the steps or like mental check notes that I would say in terms of knowing, am I really interested in this and how am I showing that currently? Because whenever I was in a leadership role and I had a team leader position open up, for example, and I would have people show up out of nowhere and I'm like, oh, I had zero clue that you were interested in this role. So tell me, how do you think that would transition if we've not had a conversation? I'm not seeing those actions. I'm not saying that you should take over a leader's role by any means, but like,
Right.
let's talk about how you can be a leader without that title. So that's kind of the first step. But the biggest thing really is that people relationship piece. I think you said that so well, Melissa. And it sounds like your other guest, everyone's kind of on that same page. And it's so simple, but not many bosses do it. It's like so
I
surprising to me
know.
that you just have to ask some simple questions about, not just what are you doing over the weekend, taking it a step further and maybe even following up like, hey, I knew you were going, out of town with your mom and sisters. How was that? I know you were a little bit worried about how you'd all fit into the car. Like, how was that? What'd you guys listen to on the car ride, right? Like
Yeah.
asking a little bit more to show that you're truly engaged versus like one step of small effort. So when you're building those relationships and gathering feedback from the team, that is, I think, the best space to step into is kind of be a sponge. Hey, what would you like to see? What are things that you feel, might be missing? And I'm not guaranteeing I can make changes for this anytime soon or maybe ever, but I'd like to write down some things that you would like to see differently with me being here as the leader. And let's talk about it and open up some dialogue. And that's how you can kind of build some of that trust.
Yeah.
And then a step from there is lifting up your team. I always like look for the best in people and try to shout that out, whether that's in a Slack channel or email or in a group meeting. Again, making sure my team member feels comfortable with how I'm going to be praising them. Not everyone wants that
Yeah.
public recognition, but checking in with them. How do you like to be recognized? How do you like to know that you're doing a good job? And then following through on that with really specific compliments goes a long way. So those are two really simple things that anyone could really do at this point, is build those relationships with team members and find out how people like to be praised and actually praise your team members. It like there's nothing that can go wrong from there, really.
That's so true. And it's interesting because I've honestly never considered the idea that people like to be praised and recognized in different ways. And it's such a simple thing. When you said it, I'm like, that's very obviously true. So I can tell you in my experience, I've never had someone ask me, how do you like to be
Mm.
recognized? Like, what makes you feel valued at work? I've never had anybody ask me that. So that's a great question to ask. And it really does set the precedent of saying, I respect what you're comfortable with, and I want to honor you in ways that you are comfortable with. And that takes it a step further. Now it's more than just developing a relationship, but you're saying, I really respect who you are. And I want to make sure that what I'm doing doesn't make you feel uncomfortable in any way. And I don't know many leaders that do things like that. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, it's like some people are more, money driven and they like that $25 Amazon gift card or something. And for me, like, sure, that could be great, but I would prefer more of that like specific, genuine compliment of like, hey, I really appreciate like in this team meeting that you were so aware of your other team member and really made sure that, so and so didn't talk over her and you brought her back into the conversation. Like I could see how much she appreciated that and just her nonverbal cues and was able to get her point across without really feeling deflated. Something like that, right? Versus saying, hey, good job, and sending me a virtual Amazon gift card. Like, it's just so different between everyone. And so, yeah, when we can challenge ourselves to do things like that, it does make a difference.
I would imagine that that would make an incredible difference in morale across the team. And when people are happier and they feel valued at work, they're also kinder to each other and more willing to help each other on the team. And it spreads, it's a domino effect. One person is a little bit kind to someone else, and before you know it, the whole team is on a Slack, complimenting each other on a job well done, and the team is supportive and they're collaborative. And it raises it to a completely different standard. And it's so simple. It doesn't require much. It doesn't have to be so difficult, right? Like you said, it's simple. Just ask them about themselves. Yeah.
Mhm.
There's a gentleman that I was talking to earlier today because TKO, the Kindness Objective, we're going to be partnering with the Suicide Prevention Alliance here in my city in Clarksville. And so yesterday I met with the mayor, and he's one of the nicest people I think I've ever met in my life. And so the guy that I was talking to today, he's like, I love Joe Pitts. He said, I've known him for 30 years. He said he literally still writes handwritten letters to people to recognize and acknowledge them. He said, we have 1,400 people that are employed by the city. And every morning he goes in early at 5:30 in the morning to write
Wow.
handwritten letters to people. And he'll literally put a stamp on it and send it out. Like if he hears that someone lost a family member or whatever it is, just so that people know, like, I care about you. And he doesn't do it for the recognition because nobody knows this about him. I just found this out myself, but he genuinely cares about people. And that's why everybody loves him so much.
Yeah, and those are the things that if you have some space in your office cubicle or anywhere in your workspace, those are the kinds of things that you are keeping on display, is notes from your team members or from your leaders with those genuine compliments. Of course, it has to come from that good place, but swag is great, and these, again, gifts can be great, but don't forget to put that like human aspect into it as well, which are some of those like handwritten notes, or just like I work in a day job, and my boss called me. I was messaging him over Slack, and he, instead of responding via Slack, he actually like called me over the Slack audio, and I was like, that was really cool. He didn't have to do that. And it was more effort to do, and simply just to like break up the back and forth of messaging. So just simple things can really go a long way.
They do. And I can tell you from, let's see, was it 3 years ago now? I still have a card on my refrigerator next to all my son's drawings from Fleetio, where I worked. And I was new there. And the founder of Fleetio wrote me a handwritten card. And then my manager wrote me one too. I got 2 different cards in the mail, and I'm like, what is this from Fleetio? And they were literally, thank you for all of your hard work. We appreciate how hard you work, and you crushed it this quarter, and congratulations. And we're so glad to have you on the team. That meant so much to me. I can't tell you how much that meant to me, especially having come from a completely different environment where I was literally like about to lose my sanity because of the toxic management and everything that, I dealt with there. I was so much happier to work for them, and I worked harder for them. And it really just made me feel like $1,000,000. And it was such a simple thing. And to your point, it wasn't Fleetio swag, although they did send that, and that was fun too. But that handwritten letter meant more to me, I think, than anything ever in my entire 30-year career in sales.
That
I still
is
have it.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yes,
So you're right.
I love that.
You raise a good point. You don't have to be in a leadership role to be a leader. You can support your team. You can help them with things that maybe they don't understand and be a team player and things like that. Those things are going to be noticed by other people in the organization. Now, sometimes if you're working in a toxic environment, that can be perceived as a threat to your leadership team because they're thinking, this person's smart, this person is capable, and it can unfortunately put a target on your back because they see you as a threat to their position, which in my opinion, it's time to find another company then. But because who wants to work with that, right? But there's clearly a balance of being a leader when you're not in a leadership role and not coming across as too much.
Yeah, I think there is definitely not necessarily a fine line, but like a balance, right? I think we've all worked with someone who's like a total know-it-all and maybe lacking some self-awareness, because it's so great to have the knowledge, But when you're not aware to like of when to kind of chill out a little almost, you don't have to be the only one answering all of the questions. People know that you're smart and that you know these things. So sharing the space, for example. But let's say in your example, if I'm the team member who wants growth and I am knowledgeable, my confidence is growing, but it's maybe not the best place to work. And so there are some of those office politics. And maybe again, they're like seeing me as a threat, or even my direct leader could potentially be seeing me as a threat because they're feeling like if I'm doing all of this stuff, then does that mean they're no longer valuable? So I could definitely see that happening in the workplace. And you're right. First and foremost, it is definitely time to be looking for other options. Always good to be networking is what I talk about, building your network and relationships. But I would say it's helpful to gain buy-in, and this is where it is definitely a skill to be learned over time. It is not something I was good at the very beginning because I worked in a situation like that. I worked at a very well-established company for that first team leader role that I got promoted into was kind of like that. People felt threatened if you were really good at what you did and you took initiative and you had really smart ideas. It was kind of wild, some of the things that me and some of my other like female leader friends who were really smart, driven, similar to myself, we would bring up these ideas, they would get shot down, and then maybe it's a couple meetings later, one of our male counterparts would bring that same thing up, or one of the leaders who happened to be male would say, hey, we've been thinking about this idea, and we as in like upper leadership thought
Yeah.
about this, and now we're going to implement it. And we were like, are you kidding me? Like it felt like this weird mental like, what is happening? Because
Yeah.
like, was no one else there when we were talking about this exact same thing and now you're implementing it as your own idea?
Yeah.
I've definitely experienced that. So all I can say in that situation is like the grit and the perseverance you build in those kinds of companies can really serve you or break you.
Yeah.
And so that's part of a choice. Am I going to let this break me, or am I going to keep doing my best work until I find something else? And for me, that was, having good communication with my leader, who was amazing. We're still friends to this day. And he was such a good advocate and a support system and a shield to the rest of some of the like not so great stuff that was happening in that workplace. So I was very grateful to have that. And it was hard to find opportunities to stand out because I feel like I was consistently shut down, even though I was a great person to choose for certain things to run. Other people were being chosen because, some of that inner office politics that can come up. So
Yeah.
I would just say, okay, I'm going to have to learn to approach this a different way, or again, build those relationships with my direct team and expanding from there. And they knew like how much I'm helpful. They knew how much I, would teach them and train them and guide them and all of those things. So I felt fulfilled in that, even though I knew I couldn't expand a whole lot more than that. And I had to be okay with that to a point, again, until I found something else. So that's kind of the advice that I would give is,
Yeah, and I think another thing when you talk about office politics, being a woman in sales for a very long time in the transportation industry and trucking,
mm,
that was even more so where you're dealing with some kind of discrimination as a woman in the workplace because it's trucking, right? I mean,
yeah.
so it was a lot of that in my experience. And to your point, like you, I didn't go and get a college degree. I had other things that I wanted to do. I was touring and singing and having a blast against my father's better judgment. He was like, "No, you need a fallback plan." And I'm like, "No, I was like 19. I'm going to be famous." Right. So I did not
Mhm.
do the college route. And I've always been very smart, but I don't learn in the same ways that other people learn. And so a typical classroom environment for me. I feel like it was not set up for people like me to be successful because I learn in my own way. Everybody has their own ways of doing things. And so when you're already dealing with office politics and maybe some discrimination as a woman, and now you're the one that doesn't have a college degree, it adds an additional layer to being able to work your way up into a leadership role. And great on you for not letting that hold you back, because a lot of people would allow that to hold them back.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something. I share that the book Grit by Angela Duckworth is one of my top favorite books because, like, I grew up and I didn't have a lot. I mean, I had like privilege, absolutely. Like, I'm a white female with so much privilege. I grew up in a very conservative town, but like, we had our own challenges. My mom went to prison when we were all very young. I have 5
Wow.
siblings. And then when she got out, like, I found out when some people like couldn't be my friend, it was because their parents knew, my mom had been incarcerated. So therefore they didn't want, their children to be even like affiliated with me. And so like
Wow.
kind of that thing. And then having that happen again, even my mom went to prison for a second time when I turned 30. And I didn't think maybe it would affect me as much as it did and our whole family. But like, there have definitely been some of those things that I have struggled with. Like, I wasn't popular in high school. I didn't have a lot of friends. I had transferred schools halfway through my high school days. And so it's just like people don't see that now because they see this, confident, strong woman, and they're almost like, gosh, I was really scared and intimidated, that I get that feedback a lot because you just hold yourself really well and you're so confident. So I was actually like nervous to approach you at first. And so I totally get that piece. But
Yeah.
it's just funny when people kind of understand more of my upbringing and some of my own experiences growing up. It changes things. So again, it feeds into kind of what we've talked about in terms of getting to know people beyond that surface level and like understand like what their heart is. Everyone's heart is different. And so when I understand what your heart is, I can have more like empathy and compassion. And, if you had a family member who, like a parent who was at their end of life, like, you better believe, like, I'm going to be giving you more grace in a deadline for something that's happening, or I'm going to be checking in on you more frequently if that's helpful, or infrequently, vice versa, because I actually know who you are. And I've seen so much more success in all of my connections, my network, with people who are doing such great work and have high retention of their employees. It's because their leaders really are working to see them all as human beings first, and
Yeah.
employee is not even like right up there with them.
That's wonderful that you do that and that you are that way with your team, and it's needed, because outside of work everybody has a life and everybody has a story, or 2 or 10, whatever their story is. I feel like, when we look at like the bullying with kids in school, which was originally the purpose of TKO, and then I started to see so much toxicity in the workplace that I realized there's a lot of opportunity to make
Mhm.
things better, not with children, but with everyone. And so one of the
Yeah.
things that I've always said is, when you can get to kids that are very young and give them an opportunity to walk a day in someone else's shoes, then and only then can they develop empathy. Because again, empathy isn't about being kind. Empathy is about being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and
Mhm.
see how they might feel. So we have workshops for kids that we're doing where one of the activities is where they all write down something anonymous about their life that no one knows. And then we read it out loud, anonymously, of course, which protects them from being ridiculed or judged or picked on, or whatever the case is. And then as a group, we
Mhm.
discuss, like, how would that have made you feel in that situation? And so now they're in a room with 25 of their peers and they're able to think, like, somebody in this room went through that. Wow. They don't know who, but they can understand how that person might feel in that situation and what they can do to offer them and show them kindness to support them through life and through school, as opposed to
Mhm.
just, oh, I'm going to make fun of you. I don't know anything about you. I don't like your shoes. You're going to be my target today. Your kids, their worlds are so small, right? They're
Yeah.
so small. They have no idea that outside of themselves and this little bubble that they live in are people with real struggles and real things that they go through that are not easy. And so that's one of the ways that we're trying to instill empathy in kids to prevent and combat this bullying issue, which is out of control. The bullying is out of control.
Yeah, I love that. And as you're expanding into other ways, like so much of it is from the parents and how we are teaching our children and what we're saying. Like they are just those little sponges. I have 2 young daughters as well, and I am trying to do my best to like help them, see the best in others, to treat others with kindness. And I'm still learning and growing on my own and trying to again instill that in them. But gosh, like I so appreciate and respect what you're doing to just help like the world be a nicer place and to give that grace. And so often there's this like I don't know, a model. It's called the CTFAR model. If you've heard of it, it's like circumstances, thoughts, feelings, CTF, yeah, actions, results. So circumstances, everything in life is a circumstance, right? And so if you're the smelly kid at school, like that's the circumstances that like you're smelly, and what we choose, the thoughts that we have, which it was only maybe 6 years ago that I started taking more control over my thoughts to say, I'm not a victim to my thoughts. I choose those thoughts. So the circumstance, everything is neutral, but we could choose to say, oh, they're smelly because they don't take care of themselves, or because whatever, million excuses. Or we can choose, oh, wow, like maybe something's going on that's really hard for them at home. Maybe, again, they had a family member who passed away and someone's experiencing deep grief and they can't even get their kid like a bath because of those like what they're experiencing in those circumstances. So it's, again, like helping encourage little children as well as, adults. Like we get to choose, and hopefully as we continue to provide awareness, that people choose to assume the best, and to give people some of that grace that we would sometimes want for ourselves too.
As you're talking, you actually gave me a really great idea for another workshop that we could do at TKO. So,
Nice.
yeah, so I'm thinking, and I'd love your feedback on this idea. When you have a group of kids and they're doing a workshop, you can write down a circumstance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it could be anything. It could be someone's smelly. It could be someone's overweight. It could be someone's clothes are dirty. It could be anything. And then have them write down all the different reasons why that might be the circumstance, to get them to think outside of they're just smelly. Well, maybe why are they smelly? And maybe that's a great exercise for these kids to teach them to think about different perspectives and different reasons for things that maybe they would never have thought of before, and teach them in that way to perhaps be less judgmental.
Absolutely. It's like my daughter in her school, she has a gal who is diabetic. And so she's educating me on, hey, she has this little monitor and it tracks stuff. And, at certain times she can't have certain foods. And, so she's learning from this kid who's telling her probably, I just can't eat that. And then my daughter is curious, well, why? Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that would be a great exercise, because again, they're always learning. And I think, again, it comes from us adults where we start adding in that judgment, whereas kids they're so loving and accepting and just like amazing little angels. But when we start to kind of, head them down a path, and I think with your initiative, and I would love to see that expand in so many ways into schools and programs and everything, so that they can understand and help them see, again, with their small awareness. I think that exercise you mentioned is a great idea of like what things could be happening to them to have this be the case, and these kids who maybe have a lot more privilege than others might be like, oh my gosh, I've never thought that I might not be able to afford soap, and like, so then you start bringing them down those paths. Maybe they are mean because they're hungry. Maybe they don't have food at home. And so they're irritable because they're really like starving. It's just like those simple acts of compassion can make such a difference.
That's a great point too, because there are a lot of kids, and it's so sad that this is even the state of the country, but there are kids that only eat when they're at school, and
Mhm,
then they go home and they don't have food, and they
mhm.
literally are starving and waiting till lunch the next day. And again, it's to your point, it's like you don't know, you know what the circumstance is at first glance, but you have no idea what the actual big picture is. And that's where we have to expand people's thinking so that they can cultivate understanding of other people's situations, which is going to alleviate some of that judgment. And taking it even a step further, I never thought about maybe somebody doesn't have money for soap. Maybe now we look at, if we're doing this program in a school, maybe now we look at, let's have a donation box and you can bring soap and toiletries from home. And if a kid needs that, they can go to the office anonymously and just get what they need. And so it builds on itself, right? Everything builds from something else. And the schools is definitely an area that we're focusing on. We're talking to the president of the National PTA, hopefully in a couple of weeks, about
Good.
how we can partner with them. But there's just such an endless amount of opportunity to teach people simple ways to be kind, that it's so easy to not judge people. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
be this horrible judgment of someone. You can simply just look at it from a different view that you might not have had before and say, you know what? As opposed to making fun of this kid, maybe I'll go ahead and bring him some new shoes since he doesn't have any money for shoes, things like that. And at work, like what you're doing with these up and coming leaders,
Mhm.
you're working to create and cultivate a much better leadership that we're going to see across the board in these workplaces than we've had recently. And I love that you're doing that. I love you for that. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I love like our different experiences that we go through to then, right? If I hadn't experienced, I say with my husband, he's an electrician and his career has just been this steady growth. There's constant, just this perfect little line, right? And mine is just this like Richter scale of just like highs, lows, like kind of here, and then like real lows and then some highs. And it's just so funny. Like I know that all of the things I experienced in my career, getting sexually harassed over, text messaging or workplace chats by like, and I didn't even understand the idea of like grooming. And I later realized that is what like a male leader was doing to me. And grateful like nothing like physically ever happened to me, but just going through that, even sexual harassment over workplace messengers by two different leaders at two different companies, like that was hard. And like getting laid off when I was pregnant with my first daughter after we just completed our round and finally got pregnant via IVF after struggling for 3 years, so many things that had happened to me in my career. And I kept thinking like, why me? Why? Like, what is happening? I feel like I've done all these like quote unquote right things and these are things are happening, but because of that I now have like I have more empathy to people who are experiencing those things, or has given me a reason to do what I do now. Is my focus in growing the Future Leaders program and helping to provide more support to people in those leadership roles. And I'm sure same for you, like things in your history and how you were raised and things that you're passionate about. Like, I just think it's so amazing when people find those areas of passion and find ways to take action to help, again, make this world a better place in different ways. So I'm excited and cheering for you too.
Thank you so much. So, for people who might be interested in working with you as a career coach, if they want to get into
Mhm.
leadership and they want to do it right and they want to get in there and act with kindness and be compassionate and supportive of their teams, and reach out to Nichole because that's what your whole thing is about. How can they connect with you?
Yeah, the best place is probably LinkedIn. I'm on there almost every day. So if you search my name, again, it's Nichole Harrop, Nichole, last name Arrop. If you're like, I don't even know what LinkedIn is yet, so I'm going to do it someday. My website is growvio.com. So either way, you can find out a little bit more.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, first of all, thank you again. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about your past and your experiences and everything that you're doing right now with your company. And I wish you all the success in the world. What you're doing has a great purpose, and that makes me even want to root for you even more. So I'm going to keep up. And I'm going to see how things are going, and maybe we'll have you back on. But I appreciate you taking the time to come on and support us, and we support you back. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being on here. Thanks, Melissa.
Pleasure. For everybody watching, remember to be kind, be empathetic, be compassionate, think outside of your bubble, consider what other people might be going through, and just be kind.